on page 263. We're starting from. We are holding 7 lines from the top. The line begins Loyash Hayeshus and Kamoikin Gamba Klippus. That's where we're holding. And we were talking about that a peel, klippa, the way it was at the beginning of creation was a positive thing. It was a good thing. Because the klippa at the beginning of creation was not about opposing Kedusha. It wasn't about being something negative to Kedusha. It was actually something that's just like a physical klippa, physical shell and peel that's there to protect. But also just like a physical shell and peel, it's there at the beginning. But later on, it needs to be removed. The same thing by for example, there's the level of Yeshus, which is like the klippa, that at the beginning of the Avodah, the Yitzhahara tells him, who are you, what are you, why you, who are you to serve the Eibishter? The Eibishter is so great, and you're who you are. So he needs to have Yeshus, he needs to have at least that minimal amount of klippa, which is a good thing. So he should have the courage, and he should have like the chutzpah to serve the Eibishter. But once he begins the Avodah, he has to get rid of that. Just like when you're eating the fruit, you don't want to have peels and shells mixed in the middle of your food, as we'll soon explain. And then now he's going to bring that to be able to understand it back at the beginning of creation. At the beginning of creation, before the Chet Hadas, the klippa was something separate. The klippa was only on the outside and protecting, and that was a positive thing. So he says, 7 lines from the top, so too it's also in the klippas. The way there from the perspective of the creation prior to the Chet Hadas, at that time, there was no intermingling, a mixture between good and bad, between klippa and kedusha. I know this means klippa had no connection with kedusha. Why is that so? Since the idea of klippas were that they were protecting on the kedusha. And we said earlier as well that something that protects, a guard, a wall, whatever protects, the protection is always on the outside of the thing that's protected. It's not inside, it's between the thing that's protecting and at the outside. The inyan hagano mechutz la'davar, and the protection is outside of the thing. Therefore, they had no association, no connection with kedusha. Hainu as kedusha garnet givus sheyesh l'metzias haklippas. Kedusha wasn't even aware of the fact that there's klippas because they were totally different entities. It's like we gave yesterday the mashal of a palace that you have the guards outside the palace. Someone living in the palace, someone that never steps out of the palace, may not even know that there's guards outside the palace or walls outside the palace because he doesn't even have any contact with it. Maimer, like there's the statement that says, before the Chet Hadas, the place of klippas was beneath all the world, meaning completely separated and completely disconnected from anything having to do with kedusha. But through the Chet of the Hadas became a mixture and intermingling of good and bad. The beginning of the Chet of the sin was that Adam Arishan looked at the makom of the place of klippas, like it says, and she saw that it was good for the eyes and there was a nice look to it and so on. That was the beginning of the sin. The beginning of the Aveda, the beginning of the contact between Kedusha and Klippa is looking at the Klippa, giving the Klippa value and importance, seeing the Klippa. And glance is the wrong word, but examining and looking and seeing at it. Through looking at it, through examining it, now klippas that previously were completely separated from the person because the person Adam was in the level of Kedusha and the klippas were outside the realm of Kedusha. Now the first meeting point, the first association came by looking at the klippas, and through looking at it, now there came a connection. If you don't even look at something that's negative, then there's no connection. Where does the connection start? You start looking at it and saying, "Ooh, that's nice and that's good." And what? The first step, the first impression, the first connection begins with looking. And then he says, because a person is a pnimi, in other words, everything is taken and internalized. It's not just in a transcendent, makivdik way. Even things that seem to be transcendent and external, they also affect them in the pnimis. One would say, so you looked, what's the big deal? I looked where I wasn't supposed to look. But the nature of a person is, because he's pnimi, everything he takes in the pnimi. And even something like looking, even something that's only external, I'm just looking. You know, the expression, I'm just looking. That affects the person as well. This is how you know in many things that not to look when we're not supposed to look. But Lazois, through admiration looking in the place of clippers, the seeing affected an excitement, an emotional impact on the person. And clippers, and then now he got an association, a connection with the clippers that previously, what we said before, they were completely disconnected from them. Because it became a mixture of good and bad. Just like the Eitzadas, which is good and bad, that in the Eitzadas itself, it was an intermingling of good and bad. That was the idea of the Eitzadas, that it was the one place where good and bad were combined, even though in general we said the whole Seder Ishtalshlus, good and bad was separated, and the bad was beneath Seder Ishtalshlus. But in the Eitzadas, that was one place where they did meet, one place where they were combined. In a similar vein, through looking, Nasa Taruvas Toivera becomes now a combination and a mixture in Adam Rishon himself of good and bad. And through the intermingling that happened, through seeing and looking, which is the beginning of the sin, now clippers become transformed, and clippers, instead of just being a protector of Kedusha, now the clippers have the capability to now oppose Kedusha, which prior to Adam Rishon looking at clippers, prior to being aware of clippers, prior to giving clippers a place at the table by mixing them into Kedusha, prior to that, clippers had no power to oppose Kedusha. Now we gave clippers a place at the table, we gave them importance, we gave them value, and now they're able to oppose Kedusha and attack Kedusha. The koydem ataruves liyoshay mechus lekedusha, before the intermingling of good and bad, and since they were outside of the borders of Kedusha, of holiness, and they didn't have any holiness intermingled in them, they were weak. They didn't have the energy, they didn't have the capability to oppose Kedusha. Through the intermingling and the mixture of good and bad, of Kedusha in the Klippim, since they have a connection with Kedusha, and some life force and vitality came down to them from holiness, therefore they have the power to oppose Kedusha. It's a very amazing analysis of what takes place with Klippa and how Klippa is able to oppose Kedusha. We always know about Yisron Oyer Ala Choshech, Ma'at Oyer Doicha Harbe Choshech, a little bit light dispels a lot of darkness. How is it even possible that Klippa can oppose Kedusha? Where does Klippa have such energy, such power? So the reason why Klippa has such energy and such power is because it derives the power from Kedusha itself. When Kedusha looks at Klippa and gives it value and import, so that itself allows for Klippa to be stronger, and therefore is able to attack Kedusha. Then he says a similar vein. In our avoidum, Moishu being in avoided just like it's in our service of Hashem. When there is ego at the beginning of the avodah, like we said before, that prior to beginning the avodah, he has to have that type of ego and say, yes, I can serve Hashem. Yes, I can approach Hashem in my service. It's not an intermingling of good and bad. It's only, it's the way the bad and the klippa is a protection, like we said, an outside wall between it and the things outside. What happens afterward? Now, when the person really starts the avodah, when he's in the middle of the avodah, and all of a sudden he starts feeling his ego, he starts feeling yeshus, he starts feeling pride. And now he has ego from the service itself. He's already not on the outside. We're not talking about the wall on the outside to protect. We're talking about inside. You're eating already the fruit. You're eating already the orange. Over there doesn't belong, it peels. That is the idea. The yeshus that he has for the avodah, that's the intermingling of good and bad. That to the bad, vitality and energy comes to the good, from the good. Why? What is his ego? His ego is not because of the fact that he knows how to play baseball. His ego is not from the fact that he's very rich. His ego is being derived from the avodah itself. So you have here a chayis that's coming to negative, to ego, to klippa, that's derived from holiness, is avodah. So then then the ego and yeshus is even worse. Like it's brought down Sfarim that when the yeshus is derived from kedusha, it's worse than if I have yeshus from the fact that I'm very rich, for example, or I believe I'm very smart, etc., etc. So too, the Alter Rebbe writes in halacha, not in Tanya, not in Mamorim. It's in his halacha sefer in Hilchos Talmud Torah. When a person studies Torah with ego and arrogance, he temporarily adds vitality and life and energy into klippas. So he's taking kedusha and he's using the energy and vitality of kedusha to give energy and vitality to klippa. That's the mixture of good and bad, and that's how klippa has the power to oppose kedusha. So too, it's also in the sin of through being a mixture of good and bad. And they have life force and vitality that they're getting now from kedusha. That very chayis that they get from kedusha, they're using that very vitality to oppose kedusha. It's an amazing concept. Only we can give the klippas the tools to oppose us. Only kedusha could supply the energy and vitality that then klippa turns around and uses against kedusha. If kedusha would not share its energy with klippa, so klippa would not be able to oppose kedusha. Let's learn another paragraph before we open up the questions. Top of page 264, fourth page in your download. That's why the sin of the Eitzadas is called someone that kills a soul. Because that's what we asked at the beginning of the Maimer, this concept of why is it a matter of what's the association between a murderer that goes to a Arim Miklat and goes to cities of refuge. What's the association between that and the idea of the Chet Eitzadas? So he says that since or through a sin becomes the mixture of good and bad. because the truth is that's in every sin, not just in the Chet Zadas. We just said the Chet Zadas, the root for all sins, but it's in all sins. It has this commonality with murder. That by a sin, life force and vitality comes out of holiness to klippa. That's what it means. He pours out the blood of man into man. The dam ha'adam, the blood of man, is talking about the man of above. It's talking about the Eibishter. And the blood by a human being, that's where their life is in. Their vitality is in the blood. Uchayis the kedusha. So we're talking about the blood of a person. That means the chayis of holiness. That's the life force and vitality of the general Seder Ishtalshus, Shachayis U'Mo'ira. That the life force and vitality of all the Seder Ishtalshus is in the light of the Kaf. Like we say in Friday afternoon before Mincha, that flow of the Kav is like a neshama to a body, the ihi chaim legufa. It's the life for the body. So we see that it's like it's the vitality. The Kav is the vitality for Seder Ishtalshus. Through a sin, he pours out the blood of the man of kedusha into the man. What does it mean, into the man? We explained before. He draws down the vitality of kedusha into the place of klippos. The Adam is referring to the Adam Blial we said before, the wicked man, the evil man, into that level from the Adam to kedusha. He pours out the vitality into the Adam of klippa. That's also what it says. One who is noikiv. Noikiv, we said before, it's in the word punctures. He punctured Shem Havai. The one who sinned and made a blemish and passed over or moved over the road. What road are we talking about? Derech Havaya. There's the path of Havaya. And instead, who noikiv Shem Havaya canal, he punctures the Shem Havaya and he passes over and he takes the energy from Shem Havaya and places it into klippos. Shemam shechayis b'klippos. He draws down the life force and vitality into klippos. So now the Rebbe says, here we can understand an amazing thing about if you will, the psychology of the Yetzer Hara. But this will be understood much on the Roim Yetzer Hara mishtadel bekama tachbulis lahachtis adam. But this will be understood what we see, that the Yetzer Hara tries all different types of schemes and tricks to make the person sin. It's not straightforward. It's like we a lot of times the Amar Chazal is how the Yetzer Hara sneaks up on us. He tells us first to do this, and then he tells us to do that until he gets us to sin. Or the Rebbe a lot of times uses the expression, the Yetzer Hara likes to dress himself up in a silk kapota, and he looks like this, trying to tell us to do the greatest things, but really it's a scheme to be able to get us to do wrong. Why is the Yetzer Hara so involved and so looks for all these different types of schemes to be able to get us to do an Aved? Says the Im Neumann. Shatam Del Chura in a movement. Seemingly, it's not understood. Why does it matter so much to the Yetzer Hara that the person should sin? Until the Yetzer Hara puts in it all different types of schemes and tricks in it. If we want to say Shatam brought down, I think, in some Svarim this concept that the Yetzer Hara hates the person and therefore he wants to undo him. In his that itself needs to be understood. What did I ever do to the Yetzer Hara? Why does the Yetzer Hara hate me? That he tries to find all different types of ways for me to sin. Based on what we learned before, it can be understood what is the Yetzer Hara's mission and point. According to the above, it's understood. That since the chayis of everything comes from kedusha, also the Yetzer Hara and klippos, their life force and vitality is specifically from kedusha. And the way one receives life and vitality from kedusha, it's through bittul. There's going to be a core point in the next few paragraphs in the Maimon. That the awe of Hashem, being bottled to Hashem, that is the source of life. Since the clippers do not want to be in a state of bittul, so therefore, how then will they receive their highest? Every being, including clippers, wants to be alive and wants to attain more and more life. That's the natural state. So if clippers don't want to be bottled, they need to find a different means to be able to derive the highest, which is its sole source, is kedusha. Therefore, they put in all different types of effort in tricks and schemes that the person should sin. Through that, they'll receive life force and vitality, like he said before, that the person causes, when he does an Aveda, he causes the intermingling of good and bad. And Tanya explains, and in other places we have this in Chitas and so on, that Yaakov Chevel Nachlosi, the person's neshama is connected always with Kedusha. So when a person becomes a vehicle for this gilui of chayis, so when a person chas v'sholem does an Aveda, so what happens is he is, with his Aveda, he is now taking from his energy, which is divine energy that he has, because he's a chelik kavim al mamish, because he's a rope connected with Hashem, and he draws down the energy, like the Alter Rebbe said, Negeres HaTshuva, from the Heitatah, from the Shechina is in Golus, and he gives vitality now to clippers. So, Gam Kimadi Isa, this is also what the Chazal say. Yitzhahara, Yored Lamato, Masu. Yitzhahara first descends down here and makes us take wrong road. He makes us macht uns blungen auf Yiddish. Then afterwards, he was the one that made the person sin. He goes up afterwards and he makes the Eibishter angry at us. So the Rebbe is going to explain this on a deeper level. Initially, he descends and turns the person away. It's mastin from the word satan, and he makes the person come to sin. Afterwards, he goes up and he prosecutes. But what does it mean he goes up and prosecutes? That he says, and he lays claim to the chayas of Kedusha. He says, now I'm entitled. Now the person that sinned, he has given me a share of his chayas, the life force and vitality that came to the clipper through the sin. So the Yetzirah goes up above and says, I've earned it. It's now mine. He complains and says that according to the law, so now the chayas and the life force and vitality belongs to clippers. It's part of it's. We have earned it, and we are entitled to it. Okay. Any questions before we go on?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I don't know. I mean, might not seem relevant, but I think it is in Het Et Hadat, or prior to the sin. The first step was taken by the snake, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
We're saying that when we look at the Klippa and we give it Hayos, it's like, okay, the process starts. But it seems that Klippa has its own existence, its own initiatives many times. Like back then, okay, Adam and Hava were okay. And suddenly, the Yetzirah comes to them and starts the engagement. And it's not that it came.
That's not a steer. But if the Yetzirah would have started the engagement, and Adam and Chava would just turn away from it and say, "What's don't drive me crazy. I know what Hashem told me. Why should I even pay attention to you when I have what Hashem told me?"
But there was never any issue against talking to the snake.
There was no prohibition to talk to the snake. But as soon as you hear what the snake has to say, you shut it down. But the fact that he didn't shut it down, that he's trying to bring in things that the Eibishter prohibited, they were drawn into that.
I thought they didn't engage until they ate it. You're saying they just saw it.
Yeah, just the seeing, that's brought down. And they saw the tree that was beautiful, was tasty for the eyes. All of these things, Chiddush explains, the vision itself was the beginning of the engagement. And it's brought down, this is a lesson for us in life. It's not just about, you shouldn't hold yourself back and a wait for when you're finally engaging with the bad, meaning you're actually involved and you're holding by doing the Aveda. A person needs to hold themselves back before they even get to that stage. Don't even look at it, because when you're looking at it and you're focusing your gaze on it, etc., that's the beginning of engagement, and that's what Aveda technically. That's what Aveda gets us, because once it pulls us in with the eyes, then afterwards it's much more difficult to pull away. Okay, let's continue further. There's very little time left in the shir, and this is the next part is a little bit of deeper concept, and I want to make a little bit of a dent in this topic. The Rebbe is going to differentiate between chayes the way it's in kedusha, or chayes that's the way it's in klippa. He's going to go a lot of back and forth in it, but essentially the point that the Rebbe is trying to bring out is that even though everything in kedusha receives chayes from a higher level to a higher level till it gets to Hashem's essence, still in all, each thing is considered that it's completely alive, and it's called a kiyum atzmi because it's completely joined with kedusha, and that's because of the bittul we spoke about before. Klippa, on the other hand, is something that always remains distanced from kedusha, even when it's enlivened by kedusha, it's not considered alive. Only kedusha is considered existing. I like to a lot of times give a mashal for this. You've heard this phrase before. Let's say the chayes of my body comes from my neshama. But I don't just say my neshama is alive, I say my body is alive. Why? Because my body and my neshama and my nefesh are completely joined. They're not two distinct and separate entities, even though they technically are. But my body is completely at the wishes of the nefesh. Whatever I want to stretch out my foot, I stretch it out automatically. Let's say if I put a clothing on my body, I put a glove on my hand, and the glove moves around exactly the way I move my finger. Still in all, the glove is not considered alive because the glove is not completely joined with me. Now, the Rebbe is going to go into a lot of detail about how this is with the difference between kedusha and klippa and the different levels. Essentially, there's the level of the oiris and the kalim and the neshamas, and all of these things are considered existing and alive as opposed to klippa. So that's what he's going to talk about now. Second paragraph on the page. So close a hefresh ben kedusha le klippa. This is the general difference between kedusha and klippa. The kedusha yesh chayes atzmim. In kedusha, it's the life. The thing itself is alive. It's a life of. It's called an essential life. Masha enkim beklippa, as opposed to klippa. Ein lev chayes atzmi. They don't have their own life. Bechol chayusam. Their entire life and vitalities that they receive is what they receive from kedusha through the actions of a sif. And the Rebbe asks, seemingly, how do we just make such a distinction? Seemingly, it's not understood the difference between kedusha and klippa. The k'moisha klippa in l'chayis atzim kabels ma kedusha, just like klippa doesn't have its own life and it receives its life from kedusha. So too, it's in kedusha in the entire chain order of the set. They don't have their own life. And in kedusha itself, all the levels receive from the light of kedusha. Like we say also in Paschal Yo Friday, when you will leave from amongst them, in other words, you the chayes alaki, you the kav. So then all the names, all the spheres, all the kalim will remain like a body without a soul. So we see that in kedusha also, the chayes of the lower levels, the chayes of the spheres are dependent upon the oil that comes down. Therefore, it's not understood what's the difference between kedusha and klip. So the Maimer is going to go on to explain at great length the differences and how all the oides, the kalim, and the neshamas, these are all considered alive and existing, And even though it's by Hashem's choice and Hashem's will, but it's still, because they have bittul and so on, they're completely one with Hashem, as opposed to the way klippos get their chayis. They need a person because they and the kedusha are completely separate and distinct. We'll stop over here.